The number one lesson that fundamentally changed the way that I saw the world and the way I approached my own work was the lesson I learned directly from Kobe Bryant back in 2007. And I got to watch one of his really early morning workouts. He was focusing on very basic drills. I mean, he was drilling down on the fundamentals of the game to the point he was doing stuff that I had taught to middle school age players. And when I asked him why that was, I mean, he said something that changed my life forever. He said, the best never get bored with the basics.
Welcome to the Better Human Podcast. My name is Greg Witz, and each week we're going to be bringing you some incredible and inspiring guests and topics that are going to take your life to the next level. Thanks for spending time with us. Sit back and enjoy the show. Alan Stein Jr., welcome to the show, my friend.
Oh, it's so great to be with you, man. I've been looking forward to this since we put it on the schedule.
Man, so am I. And I've got so much to ask you. You are a high performance coach. You talk about what it takes to be, at the top of your game. We could even use the terminology GOAT, right? So what do you need to do to be a GOAT in your business and everything? But you have come from an extraordinary background of working with some amazing players, NBA superstars, people like Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, right? Kobe Bryant. And the one question, and I've had this because I've worked with some high profile clients and a little bit different, but what was it like walking in the room the first time, right? Knowing that you're about to start working with some of these players, this high level of talent.
Well, it was an interesting mixture of emotions because on one hand, I was overwhelmed with gratefulness just for an opportunity to do that. I mean, that is something I had aspired to since I began my coaching career. But then that was certainly mixed with some healthy insecurity and some apprehension and, even a twinge of imposter syndrome to a degree of thinking, okay, I'm walking in to work with the best of the best. Am I good enough? Am I good enough to be able to take their game to a new level? So, and I think part of that is normal. Part of that is healthy and something I was able to quickly work through. But I'll forever be grateful that I had the opportunity to work with them. And, now that I have the gift of hindsight and I look back, I realize all of the players that I had a chance to work with taught me probably more than I ever had a chance to teach them or share with them. So it was certainly a very reciprocal relationship.
I was about to ask you that next, which is, selfishly as coaches, we also get to learn through the exercise. We get to bring our skill and our expertise to help, individuals play at the top of their game. But selfishly, we get to learn. So I got to ask you this question. I mean, being around that level of talent and in training with them, what were some of the lessons you've picked up from Kobe or from Steph Curry or Durant?
Well, the number one lesson that fundamentally changed the way that I saw the world and the way I approached my own work was the lesson I learned directly from Kobe Bryant back in 2007. I had a chance to meet him for the first time and work one of his Nike Skills Academies. And I got to watch one of his really early morning workouts. And I remember as a young coach at the time being really surprised that he was focusing on very basic drills. I mean, he was drilling down on the fundamentals of the game to the point he was doing stuff that I had taught to middle school age players. And that really surprised me as a young coach. I was expecting to see the best player in the world doing some drills with a lot of sizzle and a lot of sexiness and a lot of flash, but he just kept drilling down on the basics. And when I asked him why that was, I mean, he said something that changed my life forever. He said, the best never get bored with the basics. And it really hit me like a ton of bricks that, here Kobe Bryant is someone that's the best in the world at his craft. If he's willing to commit to focusing on the fundamentals and the basics, then they're certainly not beneath me. That's something that I need to focus on. And really now, whether it's the work I do, on stage or the work I do on page or the work I do for myself, the very first thing I do is get crystal clear on what are the fundamental building blocks that need to be worked towards mastery of during the unseen hours to get really good in that specific area. And I do my best not to leave the basics, to continue to make them part of my daily practice. And it's been an absolute game changer.
I talk corporately with sales folks and leaders and any role very specifically, I'll talk a lot about that, like the fundamentals and the discipline it requires for you to remain consistent with that, right? Why do you think people are so quick to like move past those basics, or like get like, I've done the foundational stuff, I'm going to now focus on something else? Why do people, in your mind, sort of make that leap and don't stay in that place of recognizing the significance and the importance of staying the course with that?
Well, I can admit through my own experience that depending on how you choose to frame it, the basics can become monotonous and they can become mundane. And again, depending on your perspective, they can become boring to a degree. And I think that a lot of society, and this is really propagated on social media, keeps encouraging and nudging us to chase what's next and what's new and what's flashy and what's sexy, which, subconsciously tells us to ignore what's basic. And that's a huge mistake. From a framing standpoint, I think it's okay to acknowledge that doing the basics can be mundane and monotonous. But if you actually take your focus off of that portion and you switch it over to, there's nothing boring about improvement. There's nothing boring about progress. There's nothing boring about success or achievement or winning or whatever, word you want to use. So just as long as you can connect the dots and realize that the basics are the prerequisite to performing at a high level, that's what will keep you dialed in. And, two other things that I kind of learned from Kobe on that. One is he wasn't saying that you only do the basics. He was saying they just need to be a fundamental part of your daily practice. He certainly did some more advanced moves and advanced techniques and advanced drills, but he never left the basics. They were the foundation to which everything else was built. So, he would start a 3-hour workout, spending 45 minutes on the basics, and then the remaining 2 hours and 15 minutes were doing more advanced drills. The other thing that I think is a disconnect with a lot of people is they believe the word basic and easy are synonymous, as if they're interchangeable. And those words don't mean the same thing. I mean, what it takes to be successful in any area of your life, whether it's your personal business, whether it's being a podcast host, whether it's playing the piano or whether it's getting good at the game of basketball, what it takes to perform at a high level is very basic in principle. But none of that stuff is easy to execute consistently every single day. So part of it is knowing that sticking to the basics is not easy, but it's a requirement if you're looking to perform at a high level.
Yeah. When I teach communication skills in one of our programs, I'll often get this comment afterwards, which is, man, this is like common sense. And I go, yeah, right. But the problem with common sense is it's not so common sometimes, right? Yeah. And it's what you're saying now, which is, these fundamental foundational, I'll even change the word basics to the foundational components, the foundational pieces, the foundational bricks, right? It's not easy to stay consistent with that. And I love your example of what you talk about, which is it's not that we only stay on the fundamentals and the basics. That's what we start with every single time, because we're rebuilding that foundation. We're making sure that wall is solid. So whatever the sizzle and the talent and the additional pieces that we put on top actually sit on a foundation which allow us to act and to implement them so well.
Yeah. Well, you said a word earlier that I want to touch on because I don't want to gloss over it. You mentioned the word discipline, which I believe is a pillar of high performance. And I think in society today, and once again, especially on social media, and I don't ever want to sound like I'm diminishing or judging social media. I try and use it to my own, for my own improvement as well. But I think we over glorify motivation and we under index discipline. Everybody's always talking about motivation and everyone thinks you need to be highly motivated in order to do these things, that you need to be motivated in order to act a certain way, when I actually find it's in reverse. If you're disciplined enough to start the action, the motivation will soon follow. So if you're not motivated to do the basics or the fundamentals, that's okay. You just have to create and build the discipline muscle to do them anyway. And then the motivation will follow. So, I take a lot of pride in my own physical fitness. I work out very consistently. I eat well, I sleep, that's something that's very important to me. But if you were to ask me how many times in a calendar year I felt motivated to actually work out, I don't know, maybe 24. But instead, I probably work out 300 days a year because of discipline. It's less to do about motivation and more about discipline. So I think when you can connect discipline with, working towards mastery of the fundamentals, you've created a nice foundation to which everything else will be built.
Right. I love what you're saying. It's right up my alley. I literally just recorded this video for a social post yesterday saying motivation is a myth. I'm going to wake up in the morning and I'm going to be like, I am motivated to accomplish goals today. And today is the day that I'm going to do it. And it's absolutely not. It's the grinding and the and the discipline which creates the resilience. And it's when we're really good at it, this is when we're more motivated to do it because I'm more comfortable to do it. This actually segues us into mindset. So let's talk a little bit about mindset. I mean, how important is it for us to really reframe and focus on our objectives or is it true? Here's a good question. So you're working with these amazing high performing athletes, right? Is it true that the difference between the really high performing athlete versus the sort of regular good athlete is mindset?
Absolutely, without question. I mean, and I noticed that, when I was in the basketball training space, most of my initial work was done at the middle school and the high school age level. So 15, 16 years old. And, at that age, if you have some physical prowess, if you're taller, if you're more athletic, you can use that to dominate your competition at the high school level. But then when you move up and you matriculate up to the collegiate level, especially the Division I level in the United States, you notice that most of the players then are bigger and stronger and more athletic. But then when you get up to the proverbial mountaintop, you make it to the NBA, for the most part, with minimal exception, every player in the NBA is incredibly athletic, incredibly skilled, has a very high basketball IQ. Like, those things no longer become the separator, because that's just the ante to sit at the table. The mindset is then what separates them. And, the cool part is, now that all of my work is done kind of in the corporate space, in the business world, and I'm transferring these principles of high utility, the physicality component really doesn't matter in the business world. So it's all that's left is mindset. That is without question the biggest separator. And that's why it's something that needs to be trained. It needs to be developed. Back in the sports world, I would ask a coach, what percentage of this game do you think is mental? And I would get an answer that would range anywhere from 50% to 80%. And then I'd say, okay, what are you doing to train the minds of your athletes? And they would look at me with this blank stare as if to say, well, what do you mean? How do you train the mind? I'm like, well, you just acknowledged that at least half of the game is mental. So you're leaving a lot of performance on the table if you're not doing something to train that half. And they were very well intended. They just didn't have any guidance. They didn't know how to train that part. So mindset is without question the biggest separator, but not only in performance, but I find in my own life, mindset's the biggest separator when it comes to fulfillment and happiness and joy and the perspective of the way that we see the world. How do you view the world around you? Especially coming on the heels of a couple year period where the world has been so divisive in so many different ways. How are you viewing that divisiveness? And the mindset's going to dictate all of that.
Right. You said a couple things, which is like, we got to train the mindset and we got to sort of, we got to work that muscle. What are some things that I can do that, help me with my mindset? Is it reframing? Is it, focusing on goals? I mean, what's the list? What do you do?
Well, first, I start with a foundation of saying, my goal every single day is to do the best I can with what I have wherever I am. That's it. The best I can with what I have wherever I am. Now, the reason I like that as kind of my foundational mantra is it eliminates a trilogy of behaviors that not only undermine performance, but undermine our effectiveness, undermine our productivity, undermine, our fulfillment. And that is blaming, complaining, and making excuses. Blaming, complaining, and making excuses. I choose, to use my words very carefully, but blaming, complaining, and making excuses will never, ever improve your situation and make things better. I have found that many people have conditioned themselves to making those a natural default. That is a natural reaction to when things don't go their way. They blame, complain, or make an excuse. But it doesn't do anything to improve the situation. So for me, and full disclaimer, everything that I share, both here in this conversation, on stage or on page, I'm not speaking from a place of mastery. Like, these are still things that I'm challenged by, I struggle with, and I'm trying to improve. So I won't sit here and pretend like, I never blame, complain, or make excuses, but I can say that I do so a lot less frequently than I used to. And even more importantly, I have the self-awareness to catch myself when I'm doing it now and quickly course correct and be able to say, Alan, you're complaining about something that's outside of your control. That's not going to help you. Let's course correct. So I'm not immune to it, but I like the path that I'm on, and I've made some great progress in that area. So for me, a winner's mindset starts with the acknowledgement of extreme ownership. I know that's a book title from Jocko Willink, but it's more of a mindset than a book title. It's basically saying, I do not control my external circumstances and situations. I don't control what people say or do, but I'm absolutely in control to my response to those things. And I want to be very thoughtful and intentional in choosing responses that move me forward. And that's what I think is kind of the essence of creating a winning mindset. That, combined with the ability to be in the present moment, no matter how chaotic things get, to have the poise and the serenity to not get distracted by the past or not anxious by the future. So I think if you can kind of combine all of that together, you're at the epicenter of having what I would consider a winning mindset.
And for the audience, if they didn't hear what you just said, I'll break it down. You just gave the process for step one, accountability, right? Take ownership. In order to do that, you need to be self-aware. So we could kind of say that's 1B, or kind of like that step 2, which is, all right, what's happening to me right now? What are my choices? Step 3 is, where do I now go? So do I react, or do I give myself that space? And we talk a lot about, like, there's a space between what comes out of their mouth and your reaction, or the situation and your reaction. There's a space, there's a time there. So hold that space to then give you the ultimate thing, which is the direction, right? Which is, where am I going and how am I going to get there? You also started to say something which is amazing, and this is what a lot of anxiety is created by, which is the pressure of thinking, what am I going to do in the future as per my experience of the past? I'm so busy. I'm so messed up from my past and what happened, right, that it's messing up my projections for the future. So you've got some great stories and examples of how individuals that are really high performing aren't going to focus on what just happened. They're going to focus on what they're about to do. Tell us those stories.
Yeah, terminology I had first heard from legendary, iconic Hall of Fame Coach K of Duke men's basketball, who retired this past season. He always implemented a concept called next play with the Duke basketball team, and I had read about it and I had heard about it, but then I had an opportunity to work for a gentleman named Mike Jones, who was the head basketball coach at DeMatha Catholic High School here in the Washington D.C. area, that has produced dozens of players currently playing in the NBA. Coach Jones is one of the finest coaches and leaders I've ever been around. And I actually got to see him implement next play every single day in workouts, in practice, and in games. And ultimately what he was saying was, you cannot do anything about the play that just happened. Whatever just happened is now in the rearview mirror. It is over. So if you turn the ball over, next play. You missed a wide open shot, next play. The referee didn't blow the whistle. It happens. Next play. See, he didn't want what just happened to have a negative impact on what's about to happen right now in the present moment. And, that was one of the foundational teaching concepts at DeMatha, was getting players to quickly move to the next play. Certainly in the game of basketball at the elite levels, which is played at a fast pace, if you choose to stay in the past and to have bad body language and pout and be in your feelings because you turned the ball over or you missed a shot, your man is now running down in the opposite direction and is going to score an easy layup or a dunk. So in essence, you just turned a 2-point mistake into a 4-point mistake. And one thing great leaders recognize is we're all going to make mistakes. None of us are immune to that, but we cannot be in the business of compounding mistakes. We have to siphon them off immediately. So again, you missed the shot, it's over. Now let's focus on the play at hand. And I use that terminology, next play, in my own life, in everything that goes on. If I'm on stage and I say something, and it's not as articulate as I'd like, I stumble on my words, or maybe I forget something. Yeah, next play. If I apply to speak for an event and they choose to go in another direction and hire another speaker, I'm allowed to be disappointed. There's nothing wrong with feeling that emotion, but I quickly move to the next play. I don't allow myself to wallow in something that's happened in the past. And, for me, I do make sure that I learn from the past, and I do make sure that I am prepared for the future, but I choose to live and focus in the present moment. So it's not that I'm not paying any attention to either of those. It's just where I tend to put most of my faculties, which is in the present moment. And that next play concept is so helpful for me in my own life.
I love it. I have a line that I use in my office, which is, okay, as of tomorrow, can we do this? Right? However we got here. All right, we butchered the sale, the presentation went sideways, the production or the edit didn't go, the behavior, the relationship, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what can we do tomorrow? How are we moving forward tomorrow? Right? And it's exactly that, which is, we got to keep focused on where we're going. And to be present is a practice skill, because most of us will revert to the past, right? It's weird. There's a sense of comfort and certainty by looking backwards, right? Look how effed up I was over there, right? Well, I knew I was effed up, and I knew what I felt. And there's a certainty, and one of our human needs is to feel certain in situations, right? And sometimes focusing on goals is scary because it's unpredictable, right? But I don't think it's the exercise of always achieving the goals. It's not that I pick goal and I achieve it now, right? It's about, am I stepping and moving forward? Am I always progressing that way? Am I always keeping focused on that? How important do you think planning and preparation is to this whole formula? Hey, so sorry to interrupt, and thank you for listening. I hope you're enjoying the show. If you like today's episode and you want to learn more about some of our programs, like the Better Leader program that can change your life, go ahead and click the link below.
Well, I think they're vital. I think in two different regards. Now, one thing that I learned from a mentor of mine very early, he said, Alan, you need to learn how to make preparation your separation. I'm a believer that at the fundamental level, there's only two things we have 100% control over 100% of the time, and that is our own effort and our own attitude. Now, I think without this being a game of verbal semantics, you can take effort and attitude, mix them together, and you have enthusiasm. I do believe I'm in control of how enthusiastic I am when I show up. I also think you can take effort and attitude, mix them together, and you get preparation. I believe I'm in control of how prepared I am for every situation that I encounter. So we have massive influence over these areas. And, with preparation being a controllable factor, it's my goal to be incredibly well prepared for every situation that I encounter. Now, one, I believe that's a sign of respect. The reason I am so prepared when I step on stage to deliver a keynote to a corporate audience is because I have a high respect and reverence for that audience. They're about to commit their most precious resource to me, which is their time and their attention. And I don't take that lightly. So I want to make sure that they feel like this was a great investment of their time and attention. And the way I do that is through preparation. I do a tremendous amount of due diligence, not only on the client that I'm going to be speaking for, but on their industry as a whole. I learn everything I can about their corporate culture and their core values. I learn, about the people that will be in the audience. What are their challenges? What are their pain points? What are the things that they need to hear from me to get them to think, act, and behave differently whenever I'm finished? Then once I've customized what I believe will be an impactful and a meaningful keynote, then I rehearse it incessantly so that when I take the stage, I can just be present. I don't have to worry about having memorized something. Like I can just be, because I've done so much preparation. And, but I'm doing that out of a respect for the audience. So I'm a huge believer in preparation.
Right.
Now, part of preparation is planning, and part of planning is setting goals. And I'm a big believer that, setting a distinct goal or a North Star provides you clarity and helps put you on course and gives you some direction. But I also believe that once you've established that goal, you don't need to be staring at it. You can actually put your focus on the process, another P word as we continue the alliteration, and focus on the process, the habits, the daily behaviors, the micro skills, the things that will inch you closer to reaching that goal. And I'm a huge process guy. I believe in process and systems, and I try to systematize and use processes in every area of my life. So I think if you can really plan and prepare and respect the process, those 3 Ps, you're setting yourself up to be the best version of yourself for whatever it is that you're attempting. And it doesn't mean you'll hit your goal. It doesn't mean you'll get a standing ovation from that audience, but it means you've put your best self forward to give yourself that opportunity.
And I like the way you define the difference between preparation and planning. Preparation, I heard you talk, it's a lot of questions, a lot of research, a lot of insights, a lot of learning, right? And I think we need to be open to learn in scenarios, right? Specifically as leaders. I mean, I think in the corporate world that we live in today, we're getting to a stage of leadership where leaders are not expected to have all the answers, but they're expected to be able to demonstrate emotional intelligence, to reframe, to help us focus on where we're going, not where we shouldn't be going. And I've used that driving analogy all the time. How many times have you been in the car and you're driving, you just you start to stare off to the side, and next thing you know, the car is drifting off to the side, right? So where your eyes go, your hands go. Talk to me about visualization. What's your position on visualization?
Well, I'm a big believer in using visualization. In my latest book, Sustain Your Game, I actually have an example going back to my basketball roots where they did a study and they had a group. There was going to be a 21-day span, and they were going to have a group of novice basketball players. These players weren't elite, and they were going to shoot a series of free throws on day 1. And then they were going to come back 21 days later and kind of have a post test in shooting free throws. The first group who shot free throws the first day were going to practice shooting free throws every single day leading up to the post test. The second group shot free throws on the first day, but only visualized shooting and making free throws for the days in between. And then we're going to come back for the post test. And then the third group, the control group, did neither. They just shot the first day and then they shot the last day, which I think we can all agree we wouldn't expect much improvement from that third group. But what was so mind-blowing of that study was the group that only visualized achieved about the same level of improvement as the group that physically practiced. I mean, it was negligible, the difference between the two. And yet the other group actually shot the free throws, and this group only thought about it, which just shows that if you really take visualization seriously to a visceral component, you can actually induce some serious change. And I know in my own life, part of my preparation process is when I'm going to speak, I always arrive a day early, and I want to see the venue that I'll be speaking in the next day. I want to see what the lighting looks like, what the stage looks like, how the stage feels, where the participants will be seated. Are they going to be in round tables? Or is it more classroom style? I want to get a feel for everything. And I do a full dress rehearsal that night so that subconsciously I'm preparing myself for the next day. So when I step out on that stage after they introduce me, it's not the first time I've been on the stage, and it's not the first time, that I feel like I'm in front of this audience, because the day before I visualize the audience sitting there while I'm rehearsing, and I go through those steps, and it gives me a heightened level of confidence and preparedness, which once again, as I said earlier, allows me to just be. When I get on stage, I can just be present. I can be spontaneous. I'm quick to respond if somebody says something or if anything happens. I'm very nimble, and my visualization is what frees me up to do that.
It's amazing. Like there's a Chinese proverb that talks about water flowing, that which is, there might be a bunch of rocks and stuff in the way, but the water's just going to flow. It's just going to keep moving down, right? And that's the power of being present and being so prepared. There was another study they did with runners, sprinters, and they had them sit in chairs and they had them close their eyes and they had them visualize running the race, and they hooked them up to all this biofeedback sort of whatever machinery, right? Like all the little suction cups, right? And they had them sit in a chair, still just like this for the audience. I'm sitting in a chair, my hands are on my knees, and they closed their eyes and they fired a starting gun. And they said, we want you to visualize running the race. And what they picked up was every muscle that should have fired in the order that it should have fired in, fired, right? Like all the electrical stimulus just and again, it was another example of how powerful visualization can be. And I actually watched an interview with you, and I thought it was very interesting. You were interviewed by Ed Milet, and he told you a story about his visualization. I don't know if you remember it. Where he was a young ball player, and one of his coaches was I think his first year he had a low batting average, and the second was quite high. Do you remember the story?
I do, yeah, because it was incredibly powerful.
Right. And for the audience, basically what it was the coach, sat him down and made him visualize, right, the pitch and the camera and the angle and, the stitching on the ball. And like, it's that, like when we talk about visualization, it gets that granular, right? It's not just I'm going to focus and I'm going to picture myself standing on stage. It's how am I going to move on stage? How am I going to sound on stage? What am I going to do on stage? What am I going to do in these scenarios? So it's about getting detailed with visualization. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that. They sort of treat it in a broad sense, which is visualize, right? But no, like you got to get as granular as you can when it comes down to visualizing this stuff.
Yeah. And as obvious as this may sound, it's important that we make this note. We also need to visualize what we want to happen, not what we don't want to happen. And I'll keep going back to these basketball references. One of the worst things you can do as a basketball player is you're stepping up to the free throw line is think to yourself, don't miss, don't miss, don't miss. Because you're putting all of the emphasis on the wrong thing, and your mind can only conceptualize one thing at a time. So really all your mind is taking away from that is the word miss, and you will greatly increase your chance of missing that free throw. And this is a self-induced pressure that most people put on. This goes back to what we were talking about earlier. They have a heightened anxiety because they've already played out in their head, what happens if I miss this free throw? My teammates will be disappointed. My coaches will be upset. The fans will skewer me on Twitter tomorrow. And they've allowed the visualization to go down the wrong rabbit hole, as opposed to taking a deep breath, collecting themselves, use that space, as you mentioned earlier, and say, okay, nice and easy over the front rim. I've made 1 million of these in practice by myself. I've got this. And, that's the big difference. So we have to make sure that we're using visualization, not to our detriment, but to actually get the result that we're hoping for and intended.
I love what you just said. And what you just acknowledged there is we are always visualizing. We're either going to go visualizing negative, right, which is what we're prone to do as human beings. Oh my God, what's going to happen? This is going to be bad, right? Fear of consequence, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of success. Sometimes, what happens if I do this and then people expect me to do it again? Imposter syndrome, right? How did I end up here? So we're always visualizing, and we have to interrupt that. When I talk about emotional management, one of the things we say is, how do you interrupt the wire, the thing that neurological connection that's that's firing? It's not about stopping it, but it's about going, there it is. Let me catch it. Let me see if I can snip that wire. Let me see if I can put a new wire together and start to think about it in this perspective. When we teach public speaking and presentation skills, one of the first things we teach in the morning, by the way, I haven't run this course in years, but it was one of the most powerful parts of the program, which was something called the desire factor versus the panic factor.
Oh.
So as you'll appreciate this, you're a speaker and a presenter. So you stand up in early days, you get up and you're like, oh my gosh, what if they don't like what I'm saying? And what if my PowerPoint and the truth to it is when you focus on those things, all those things start to happen as well, right? They don't take you seriously. There is a problem with technology. Your keynote or your PowerPoint's not working. In fact, there's another famous, you'll probably know this, you're a sports guy, famous story. It was about the World Series. I can't remember what game it was, but they were interviewing the one player, and they said something like, what do you think your chances are today? Right? Like, well, how do you think? The player was like, of course, we're going to win. We're going to kill it. Right? There's nothing that can go wrong unless something like in the ninth inning, right? Someone hits a ball and I end up missing it and it goes through my legs and someone scores a home run. And to the point in the ninth inning, do you know the story? Do you know the sports analogy?
Yeah, that's the famous, I believe the Red Sox first baseman, the ball went right between his legs. Absolutely. I mean,
correct.
Yeah, it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. And it's back to what we started talking about earlier, where your eyes go, your hands go. I have control of my thought. I have control of my mindset. I have control of the tools that I use to help correct that. And that's what I think we're talking a lot about today.
Yeah. Well, what I find so interesting about what we're speaking about directly now is, in essence, what we're saying is the future is hypothetical. Like with visualization, we have to acknowledge we're just kind of making it up in our head, because you can't ever be in the future. The only place you can ever be is where you are. Now, you can be in the future in language and you can be in the future in your thoughts, but you can't ever actually be there, which means that the future is hypothetical. So to our point with visualization, if we're just going to be making the future up anyway, why don't we make it up to work out in our favor? Why don't we make, if me assuming that I'm going to miss the free throw is just as real as me assuming I'm going to make the free throw, well, why don't I assume I'm going to make it, and then know that I have the emotional integrity and the coping mechanisms that if it doesn't work out in my favor, I've got the strength to overcome that and I'll deal with that then. But I don't need to be worried about something that hasn't happened yet. And this is something that I've really been doing a lot of self-work on, because I was as guilty of this as anybody else, is getting worried about something that hasn't happened. And in many cases, never will happen. I mean, talk about a waste of emotional currency and energy, is spending all of this time worried about something that might not even happen. Mm-hmm. So, but when you step on stage, don't be worried that they're not going to like you. Just to be prepared, show up to be your best self, be present, be of service. And then if for some reason they don't like you and it does come to fruition, just deal with it then. But you don't need to suffer twice. If you worry about it and then you have to suffer when it happens. And one of the ways that this is really applicable to my life is probably like many men my age, I don't love going to the doctor. Mm-hmm. I don't love doctors. I don't love needles. I don't love physicals and checkups. And I used to get so worked up and so worried in advance of going to the doctor that literally I would be miserable for 3 weeks leading up to a doctor's appointment, when in fact, I only needed to be miserable for about 5 minutes during the checkup. And once that clicked with me and said, why would I suffer and punish myself for 3 weeks for something that takes 5 minutes? Right. That makes no sense. And while I'm not immune to it now, I've gotten much better at not worrying about things that haven't happened yet.
At going to the doctor regularly.
Yes. Well said.
It's super interesting. What we're also talking about is the subconscious, like the impact of the subconscious, which is if you're not careful, right, we can take ourselves into places that we shouldn't be, right? And as we like to say, our brain has this wonderful ability to build up these movies and these stories, and they look real, and it makes sense. And what we got to recognize that a lot of what's starting to happen to us is it's our perceptions, right? We're creating these perceptions out of the need of certainty and survival. And if we're not careful, those perceptions take us down a road. This is interesting. You'll like this. Anxiety and excitement are the exact same emotion.
Yes.
right? It's just the perception or the perceived outcome of that event, right? But
Yes.
going down a roller coaster, it's so scary, right? Or standing on stage, oh my gosh, there's a bunch of tigers in the audience. What happens if they eat my head, right? Is this, it comes from the same place. And once people start to recognize that, it's what I do with that, it's the reframing. I love the concept of reframing, right? All right, I'm going down this road. It's not that I shouldn't feel this way. How would I sort of, express that differently? Becomes one of my key things that I use just to make sure that my mindset is on point.
Oh, I love that. I'm so glad you went in that direction. I mean, people ask me all the time, do I get nervous before I speak? And I say no, but I get really excited. Right. And I get the butterflies, I get a little bit of the armpit and palm sweat before I speak. But the reason is because I care, because I want to do the best job that I'm capable of. And my work is very meaningful to me. And like I said before, I recognize that someone is going to invest their most valuable currency, their time and attention, into what I'm about to do. And I want to make that a worthwhile investment for them. But yeah, I don't view it as nerves. I view it as I am so excited to have this opportunity to speak to this group about something I'm passionate about. But you better believe I get those nerves. And the day that I don't, I'll probably find something else to do, because that'll be a marker that I don't care anymore. And yeah, that excitement is huge. And in fact, there was another study, and I have referenced this in my newest book. They took a group of people that were petrified of public speaking, and they took them to a karaoke bar. And half of the people kept telling themselves, I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous. Oh my God, I'm anxious. I don't want to do this. And the other half was programmed to say, I'm excited. I'm so excited. I can't wait to sing my favorite song. They both felt physiologically the same stuff in their gut, but the group that told themselves they were excited actually enjoyed the experience more. And I guess you could say performed at a higher level. I mean, none of these were trained classical singers by any means, but it just that reframing and reframing through our words and our imagery and our visualization changes everything.
Man, you've got gold. Tell me about, so we talked a lot about your book, Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets from the Best of the Best, right? And that's kind of where we began, and you were sharing some of those stories of your work with the NBA superstars. Talk to us a little bit about sustaining your game. So a lot of tools so far on what I need to do. How do I sustain that? And I think that's sort of the premise of your next book.
It most certainly is. And what I found, the three things that impede our ability to sustain high performance and excellence and fulfillment are stress, stagnation, and burnout. And they often happen over three somewhat different timelines. Now, this is just a general framework. It's not true in every situation, but we kind of deal with stress in our day-to-day lives. We often fall victim to stagnation kind of in that midterm. Maybe you've been in a relationship for 8 or 9 months, or maybe you've been working at this job for 1 or 2 years, and you just click on the mental cruise control and you're just treading water. And then burnout is an accumulation of both stress and stagnation. And that usually rears its ugly head over more of a long term. Again, maybe you've been married for 20 years, or maybe you've been working at the same company for 20 years, and you can start to feel some of the symptoms of burnout. And really the antidote to all three of those is very similar to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. Another epiphanal moment that I had on par with that lesson I learned from Kobe Bryant was something I heard from Eckhart Tolle, who's, a modern day philosopher, for lack of a better word. Eckhart Tolle's definition of stress changed my life's perspective. He said, stress is our desire for things to be different than they are in the present moment, which it just clicked with me. In that moment, and this is after 42 years of doing it the other way, in that moment, I realized that the stress I feel in my life is not caused by external circumstances or situations. It's not caused by what people say or what people do. My stress is caused by my resistance to those things. And when I'm trying to fight reality, when I'm not willing to accept what is, that's going to increase my stress level. When I can accept it or surrender to it. Now, this doesn't mean I like it. This doesn't mean I prefer it. It just means absolutely, I'm willing to acknowledge that this happened, And now I want to allow the space, as you said so perfectly before, to be very intentional and thoughtful in my response to it. My stress will immediately go down. And I mean, it was literally when I heard that, it was like this weight vest was lifted off of my shoulders. I felt so much lighter, emotionally more nimble, emotionally agile, to be able to say, look, I already recognize that I do not control what goes on in the world. The world's going to do what the world's going to do. But boy, do I feel empowered knowing that I choose my response to what goes on in the world. And my response is what's going to dictate my stress level. And, you know, as I said before, I'm not going to sit here and pretend for 1 second that I don't ever feel stressed or get stressed out. But I feel stress and get stressed out a lot less frequently than I used to. And similar to before, when I find myself feeling stressed, I have the awareness to catch it and course correct and say, the response that I've chosen is increasing my own stress right now. I don't want that. I'm going to choose a different response.
Right. I often remind people of, you know, if it's prolonged stress, let's ask a question. If you made a decision now, what would the decision be that would alleviate that stress? Or if you had a conversation with someone, what would that conversation be that would allow you to alleviate that stress? Because it's what I often talk about specifically with guys as well as the internalization of things. Mm-hmm. Right. So, and you know, maybe that's another show for next time. But, you know, as you're saying, stress isn't bad. It's what we then do with it. Right. And yes. It's about, you know, and I love your second point, which is stagnation. I put on cruise control. I stop operating consciously and I start reverting into that unconscious thing that we all do, which is I drive a car and I get to my destination. And I think, how did I get here? These automated vehicles, it's not even a Tesla, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, we go on cruise control, which leads to burnout, man. It's so true. I could keep you here for another hour, but I got a couple.
This was so much fun, man. This was awesome. You're so fun to talk with, and we are certainly so aligned in so many of these perspectives. And I've enjoyed this immensely.
1,000%. So talk to me about changing behavior. Is it possible? Can we change behavior? How do we change behavior?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing we have to do is be aware. You've mentioned self-awareness a couple times, which is why I know that we're cut from the same cloth. You know, you'll never improve something you're oblivious to, and you'll never improve something that you're unaware of. So the first step is being able to be aware and have the humility to acknowledge that this behavior is not serving me and it needs to change. Just like you said, we can easily drive a 15-minute route to work, be so numb to the experience that we don't even remember driving there. You know, we want to discourage that. We want to be so present and aware that I realize that this behavior that I've been repeating, it's not serving me well. It doesn't make me feel good. It's not enriching my relationships. It's not allowing me to perform better. So once I have that awareness, then the next thing I need to do is dig a little deeper into an understanding of how this behavior is negatively affecting me and what's at risk if it doesn't change. So I want to go deeper. I'm aware that this thing I've been doing is not good, but why is it not good? How is this really debilitating or undermining my ability to perform well? And then the third phase is then learning how to recondition that actual behavior. Saying, okay, I acknowledge that for the last few months or years, or in some cases decades, I've gathered comfort from this repeatable behavior. I want to undo that, and I need to recondition to a new behavior. And there's 3 steps for doing that as well. You know, and being able to go through these steps is what allows anyone to be able to change behavior. You know, the first step that I would recommend in the reconditioning process is just choose one thing that you want to change. You know, one of the mistakes we make as human beings is we get so ambitious that we try to change 4 or 5 things at the same time, and we divert our energy. There's an old adage that says, if you chase 2 rabbits, they both get away. So just pick one and go after that sucker with everything that you've got. Right. Once you've done that, then you want to commit to making that change for 66 days. I know the research is all over the place on how long it takes to change a behavior. And I'm not saying there's anything magical about 66 days. I've just found that with my work and those that I work with, it's an appropriate number because it's enough of a stretch that makes it challenging, but it's also very doable.
Right.
It's just a hair over 2 months. And if you can commit to making this one change every day for 66 days, you'll start to build that muscle. And then the third step is keeping the spotlight of accountability on yourself. And you do that by recruiting the people closest to you, your inner circle, your spouse, if you have adult children, your colleagues, your coworkers, your friends, and you tell them, look, here's one behavior I'm trying to change. I'm committed for the next 66 days to changing this behavior, but I need your help. I need you to hold me accountable. I need you to check in with me. I need you to ask me how it's going. And if you can do that consistently, those three things, you have a very good chance of changing that behavior. And, I know there've been plenty of behaviors in my own life I've changed and plenty of behaviors of those I've worked with. So I know, unequivocally, people can change.
Right. And the research and the science proves it, which is from neuroscience. It says that our brain can redevelop and rewire and reconnect, and that says we can change. We also know from the world of psychology that behavior is learned. And if it's learned,
Yes.
then I can technically learn how to improve, increase, do more. And I talk a lot about this when it comes down to things like assertiveness, right?
Yeah.
But I love what you said, which I think is the most important part, which is we are eager and we're optimistic sometimes, and we take on more than we could handle. It's like, it's a horrible old saying, but how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Right? One bite at a time. And more than that, I think what you're also really reinforcing is we have to stay focused on, and we were talking about this before, stay the course, right? Keep that commitment and keep that accountability. In psychology, they say, and it very much, follows your line, which is if you want to change behavior, the first thing you need to do is go from an unconscious state to a conscious state.
Yes.
Bang. I need to be alerted, aware. Right? 2, once I'm in that conscious state, I can move into a stage of reflection. When we think about this, sort of where is this coming from? How long has it been happening? But we got to be careful about the reflection stage, because as per what we were talking about, our natural mindset will go to the negative, and I now become depressed in this stage, and I think, I'm horrible, right?
Yep.
So it's about, that's a very important stage. Then the next couple stages are easy. We move into insight. Okay, so what would I want to do? Well, I'm going to start going to the gym, or I'm going to start doing this, or I'm going to start adding this into my communication. When I speak to people, I'm going to say it like this. I'm going to add it like this. I talk a lot about nurturance, which is, you might love someone, but if you don't actually verbalize it and say it, it's not practiced, right? And hopefully, and this is what you're talking a lot about, if we do those three things well, our attitude and our mindset's going to shift.
Absolutely.
There's possibility here, right? There's potential, right? It's achievable. It's reachable, right? In the net, just go through the hoop. Just focus on hitting that shot, hitting that 3-pointer. And then it's once we've done those 4 things, we can now start to introduce the new behavior, or the behavior now becomes sustained.
I love that. Well, with what you just said, this kind of brings everything back full circle to one of our first points. Everything you just said right there is very basic in principle.
Super basic.
But none of that stuff is easy to do. If that stuff was easy, we would all be changing behaviors just like that. I mean, it takes tremendous discipline. It takes accountability. It takes support from those that care about you.
Right.
I mean, I love the way you just broke down those stages, and every one of them is as right on point as possible. It's very basic, but it's not easy to do. And we have to acknowledge that. And that's where, I'm a huge believer in supporting others. I don't think life is meant to be lived alone and go through this alone. Life is really great, but life can be hard. And the more we can get support and empowerment from mentors, from coaches, from colleagues, from family members, that's why the work you do is so profound, because people acknowledge we need help with this. And that's, I think, one of the most important steps that any of us can take, is also having the humility and vulnerability to ask for help, is to say, hey, I've got a behavior that's not serving me. I want to improve this, but I know that I don't need to go at it alone. Right. Can I hire a coach? Can I enlist a mentor? Can I get my spouse on board? Can I get yeah, man, I think everything you said there was mic drop worthy.
And to the support and the accountability, what we got to also recognize is sometimes people don't know how to provide that support and feedback well. So it sounds criticizing. So
Right.
let's not give up on the process when we've asked someone to hold us accountable, and the way they communicated it didn't sound very nice, right?
Well said.
All right. I could go on down another rabbit hole with you around, humility and everything, but we're probably going to have to do a part 2 to this.
I would love that.
Alan, you're amazing, man. Like your energy, you're authentic, you're genuine. Besides sort of relating to everything that you do, because I'm in that world as well. You can see that this is something that, like what I like to say, which is this is just for us to keep practicing. I use these tools as much as I'm trying to share these tools with you. So
well said.
Awesome. Before we come to the last question, if the audience wanted to learn more about you, if they want to get in touch with you, if corporate wanted to book you to come and do one of their conferences, how do people get in touch with you?
My main website is alansteinjr.com. I have a supplemental site, strongerteam.com, that has some information on some peripheral things I offer. I'm very easily found on social media at Alan Stein Jr. And I take a lot of pride in not only being accessible, but being very responsive and getting back to folks. So if anyone was listening to this, if you have something you want to share, if you have a question, shoot me a DM on Instagram or LinkedIn, and I'll make sure to get back. And then if anyone's interested in either book, Raise Your Game or Sustain Your Game, you can find them on Amazon, Audible, or wherever you get your books or audiobooks. And yeah, man, this was so much fun. I learned a lot from you. I feel so aligned with the work that you do. And this exceeded expectations. And if you ever want to do a part 2, I'm in.
Man, I'm totally in for doing that. And go check out Alan's books, Raise Your Game, High Performance Secrets from the best of the best. And there's so much more in there. And then definitely the next book, Sustain Your Game. Alan, thank you. At the end of the show, we come to a question, which is, what do you think we all need to do to be better humans tomorrow?
One of the guiding mantras I live by, and this was planted in me very early in my life, was that a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. And I'm a huge believer. And ultimately, if you were to ask me, what is it that I do for a living? I would say I light candles. And of course, that would probably, lack context, and I'd have to explain what that means. But all of the work I do, whether it's on stage, on page, or something I put on social, or an amazing conversation like this, I'm doing it to be in service of others and to light other people's candles. And to me, if we can all have the attitude of lighting other people's candles and knowing that it does not take anything away from you in order to do that, I think we'd live in a better world, and we'd all be better humans.
It's one of the best answers I've had. I swear to you, I'm not saying that. It's one of the best answers I have. It doesn't take away lighting someone else's candles. I don't want to butcher it. Lighting someone else's candles doesn't take any light away from yours.
Absolutely. 100%.
Wow. I'm going to use that. I'm going to quote you, right? I might butcher it.
Hey, in all fairness, it's not an Alan Stein Jr. original. I can't find the original person who said it. I've done a little research. So it's a mantra that I live by, but I'm certainly not the originator of the quote.
Man, well, you could take a lot of ownership and pride in spreading that message.
Awesome.
All right, Alan, thanks for being here. To the audience, if you like today's episode, don't forget to like it, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to share, and we'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for listening today. And if you enjoyed today's episode, you're going to love the next one.